So reality is one of those concepts that people often associate with what's real. Hey, you need to face reality, or why don't you come back to reality, Kendle? Well, what if I told you that reality itself is a subjective term? Let's first take a look at the Webster definition of the word reality. Webster defines reality as the quality or state of being real. Reality is what's real. Why? It real. Seems simple enough until you learn about Schrodinger's cat. A prevailing theory in quantum mechanics called the Copenhagen interpretation says that a quantum system remains in superposition until it interacts with or is observed by the external world. When this happens, the superposition collapses into one or another of the possible definite states. This idea is best illustrated by Erwin Rudolf Joseph Alexander Schrodinger's famous thought experiment. Meaning to point out a paradox in the Copenhagen interpretation, he asked for people to imagine there was a box, and inside the box there was a cat, a small amount of radioactive material, and a machine that responds to radioactive decay attached to a small hammer hanging over a tiny vial of poison. Now imagine a small piece of radioactive material has a perfect 50-50 probability of decaying in the next hour. If it does decay, the machine would sense the decay and release the small hammer, smashing the vial of poison and killing the cat. If it doesn't decay, the cat will still be alive by the end of the hour. The state of two things equally mathematically possible is what's referred to as something being in a superposition. Before you open the box to see what has occurred, because of perfectly equal probability, both outcomes exist. The cat is both alive and dead at the same time. Now, whether or not you find the cat dead or alive is the phenomena Schrodinger wanted to expose. How can one outcome occur without the other occurring if both are perfectly equal in probability? Eventually, you will open that box, and eventually you will see a cat either poisoned or still alive. So at what point is superposition succeeded and one probability becomes reality? Now, I'm sure you've long heard of Schrodinger's cat, but the only reason I bring it up is that it captures something that reality is often good at hiding: a flaw. How can reality be real, yet also contain concepts and possibilities that don't actually make sense? Sure, once something has occurred and we've seen it with our own eyes, we'll find a way to explain it to ourselves how that could have taken place, even if we're dead wrong. The human brain is obsessed with reality and wants so desperately for it to make sense. A flaw in reality is a bit like a hole in a ship. Humans have a desperate instinct to keep their ship afloat, and so will always search for a cork or an object that fits just enough to keep any water from pouring in and to prevent their ship from sinking. A harmless hole in, let's say, the ship's deck, like Schrodinger's thought experiments, might receive marvel and wonder, as it's not actually a threat to the ship's ability to float. But a puncture in the crucial part of a ship, let's say a ship's hull, like what our purpose is in life, is far more detriment to our outcome, so people will struggle and scatter to find the nearest thing they can plug that hole with. People will do whatever it takes to keep their ship from sinking. Which brings me to my next point. Not everybody's on the same ship. Not everyone's reality is the same. Some people exist in a reality where there's a God watching over them and waiting for them in the afterlife, while others exist in a reality where there is no God and death is probably just non-concept. There are many debates among our species about what we cannot verify with our eyes. How can a species share a reality with itself if it exists in a different reality than itself? Now, I know what you're saying. Oh, Kendle, but there's a single reality we all exist in, and reality is a state that is not altered by human perception. But I'd like to counter your rebuttal by striking up the history of Native Americans. We've all heard about the traditional ceremonies and dances performed by the Native American tribes. See, in some Native American tribes, it was believed that in order to bring decent rain for the coming crop season, a ritual dance had to be performed to appease the gods, so that their gods would grant them a good season of rainfall. Now, why would an entire civilization, and many others like it, continue to believe in something that so obviously doesn't actually affect anything? It's argued that with the arrival of colonists to the Americas came a great source of contradiction to this Native American reality. Now, we assume that the tribes were ignorant and primitive, and a larger observation of the world would have always contradicted their reality. Well, you guys probably always got rain, and you just force yourself to believe that the rain dances work no matter how much rain you actually got. Offered up a fair explanation as to the confusion of the tribe, but I'd like to offer up my own interpretation. What if Native Americans had a functioning reality in which their ceremonies actually did bring forth good outcomes for them? What if colonists simply doubted that physically real reality out of existence using information it had collected from all over the world? I'll go back to the ship metaphor again. In this case, if a ship was made out of material and had artillery and ammunition from all over the world, it would likely shoot and withstand larger holes than any ship made by materials gathered in an isolated area. I argue that both realities are equally real, but one reality wants to exist over the other, and so an argument takes place. In the ship metaphor, let's say they battle with cannons and attempt to punch holes in each other's ships and to sink the other reality. And the people who were on board the sunken ship now have to remain prisoner or conform to the winning ship's float. Now, I know you're going to say,
well, duh, Kendall, having more information means you'll win more arguments. That's so simple.
But I ask you to think about this. Christianity's most major spread was brought about by force, by intentionally sinking other ships. The Christianic Crusades, as they're known. Now, what if you don't actually need more information to win an argument? You just need a bigger ship. The bigger your ship, the less harmful each hole becomes. Let's amplify this by saying in the analogy, the sunken ship is scavenged for wood and material, as more people being on the winning ship means more space is required to keep the population. The people who join and/or are captured by the ship bring along with them material to add to the ship's size and artillery. It's important to remember what initially boosted colonial interest in exploration. Trade. Information was a side effect of exploring the land, but the goal was to find new materials to trade and/or find new people to trade with. Christopher Columbus might have really just wanted to explore the world, but his venture was not funded without the promise of monetary gain in return. The goal of learning more about life is not what funded exploration. Money did. So let's take on the idea of Native American realities being sunken by nonchalant information gathered from travels. Christianity grew large because it was involved in trade for quite a while before coming across Native American religion. Of course, the colonists came with realities harder to defend yourself against. They paid for it. The people on those ships, the crewmen, they were not interested in learning more about the world. They were interested in getting paid, in finding profit. So in a world where everyone is always trying to make their ship larger, to spread their reality, because the best way to validate your reality is to get others to believe in it as well, of course the realities that were funded by trade and therefore gave people an incentive to join and support would be stronger and harder to defend yourself against. Now, it's best not to get lost and see colonists as intentional sinkers. Maybe the Christians, yeah, but not the colonists. See, once a person believes in something, they are automatically trying to spread their reality. It's just a natural response to believing in something. You carry it with you. It sometimes results in violent arguments in which physical harm and the loss of life can take place. So we've talked about the sinking of ships and the destruction of other realities, but I've always spent my life living by a code of what makes the most sense. All the ideas I currently believe in are in a constant state of fluidity because I don't think it's necessary to sink a ship that might have valuable information and might help you better understand something about life. I've always been for the merging of my reality with others as I gain more knowledge and ideas in the process. People can believe whatever they want so long as they're not hurting anybody other than themselves, though when in a toxic state of argument, nobody wants to admit when the other ship has a point. That's basically admitting defeat and letting yourself be taken prisoner. Reality is subjectively objective. It is real to the individual. It takes a great amount of communication and empathy to simply float past another ship. The issue I've often faced is that my ideas don't necessarily validate everyone else's, so right off the bat, people try to sink my ship. I've said a lot of what I wanted to say, but the most important thing is this. If we are genuinely the deciders of our own reality, shouldn't we work together to create a productive reality that accepts everyone's individual reality instead of one that strictly pleases one group of people, outside of realities that are literally harmful to others and kids? The hardest thing for a person to realize is that the ship they're on is just one of many, and the other ships are just as real and valid as theirs is. A person will believe that someone will fail if they don't do things a certain way, based on that person's own individual understanding. And if nobody else agrees with that person, then that someone will succeed. But if everyone else does agree with that person, then that someone will be trapped as a failure. Once someone is convinced you'll always miss something, they're seeing things you never pointed out, even when there really isn't anything else there.